Okay, so we have time for a couple of questions for our scientists. Yes, Casey.
Back into all this other stuff like workers' comp and everything. So it's hugely important.
Yeah, so two-part question. One is an awareness comment, and the other one is the question, what are scientists like that? You've done a bunch of, so David will know.
40 years.
He'll know one or two.
So the way this works is, I can tell you right now, the next monograph is an aspartame, the sweetener. And in November, there will be one on PFAS and PFOA. Okay, so keep your eyes open for that. But the way this works is that as more literature is accumulated, and this can take a number of years, and independent scientists see that literature accumulating, every 5 years, as Dr. Demir's pointed out, there is a meeting to discuss, well, what should IARC review next? And if there's a sufficient growth in literature in a particular topic, even if that topic's already been evaluated, IARC can decide to reevaluate it. And one example of that is cigarette smoke. I was on both monographs, one in 1985 and one in 2004. So that's nearly 20 years apart. In the first one, we could only declare lung cancer was caused by cigarette smoke, because that's all the literature let us do. And 20 years later, we declared cigarette smoking causes cancer at 14 different organ sites, because the literature supported that evaluation. So that's how this will go. If the literature grows sufficiently, IARC will reevaluate firefighting, and it will go beyond bladder cancer and lung cancer. So.
Dr. DeMarini, can you also comment about the IARC sitting within the WHO and the World Health Organization?
Well, it's part of the World Health Organization, which is part of the United Nations. So all the signatories to the United Nations are, in a way, bound to some extent to pay attention to what IARC does. And when these monographs come out, many, many national governments respond to them. It's really very important, and they make regulations, change all kinds of things to affect things. I give you one example from the state of North Carolina, where I live. We came out with a monograph on sunlight and ionizing radiation and UV light. And I happen to have done the experiments on sun tanning beds, okay? Sun tanning salons show they're very mutagenic, carcinogenic, all the rest. And the North Carolina state legislature, they have actually a small group of scientists who kind of keep up on things, not the legislators, but staff. And they brought this to the attention of the North Carolina legislature, because we showed that tanning beds at IARC are a group 1 human carcinogen causing skin cancer. And the North Carolina legislature, a year later, this was in 2015, changed the law, which at that point allowed anyone to go to these tanning parlors. And if you were under 18, you had to have a parent's or guardian's permission. They changed the law that under 18 you couldn't go at all. Now, of course, I'd like to see them banned, but it was a step forward. But this is the kind of impact that the monographs can have, and this happens worldwide, all over the place. So, yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't. Yeah, I don't work for IARC, and so I can't tell you what IARC. I just told you what IARC's doing next. They're actually doing aspartame, and then they're going to do PFAS and PFOA in November. They have 3 monographs a year. So after that, I can't tell you. That's their business, not mine. So I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any last minute question? Oh, yep, in the back.
Hi, my name's Bill Peoples. I'm a retired firefighter from Miami-Dade County. I've been waiting for this today. I didn't know if you were going to have it. this part because I'm a big believer that chronic inflammation is very damaging to us. Everything from COX-2, C-reactive protein, hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha, interleukin-1 beta, interleukin-6, interleukin-8, transforming growth factor beta. And one of the things to reduce that, I've been a big believer in metformin, that it targets virtually all of the elevated cytokines, and that it's cheap, inexpensive, and it should be a good prophylactic for members of the IAFF to take to prevent cancer. Obviously, staying away from all the chemicals and FOS is a good idea, but at the same time, if we can do some things to help ourselves until we can remediate all these other problems, I would think that would be a good program to look into.
Yes, I certainly can't comment on the benefits of that as a supplement, but there are absolutely lifestyle changes that can be made to help reduce inflammation. So 100% agree. We've got modifiable factors that we can work on.
Yeah, curcumin, EGCG, sulforaphane, indole-3-carbinol, all of these things reduce the inflammation, stop cancer stem cells, which are essentially what causes cancer metastases and cancer not responding to different therapeutics. So in other words, we need to target cancer stem cells once we have cancer, but all these things that help prevent cancer are a lot of the same things that target cancer stem cells.
And I think that sort of leans into the comment I was making before about really understanding it's not just that clearly there's evidence of acute exposure leading to acute inflammatory response, but we need those repeated acute exposures to see what's happening longitudinally across a fire season and a career. And then if you are going to use some of these nutritional supplements, how do they then change the inflammatory response across the course of a fire season?
And if I may, I mentioned that of all these 10 key characteristics of carcinogens, the vast majority of them, of the known human carcinogens, exhibit genotoxicity, like 85, almost 90% of them. But the second characteristic most exhibited by all of them is chronic inflammation. It's really a key component of cancer. Correct.
Can you
yeah.
repeat it, because the folks online?
Yeah, he's just saying that chronic inflammation leads to all kinds of tissue damage, which it does. That's the problem.
All right, any other questions for our science, oh, in the back, yes.
Dr. Main and Dr. DeMarini, my name is Brian Bryce. I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina, and environmental attorney. And I was a political science major, not an environmental science major, so I'm learning a whole lot at this conference. One of the questions I wanted to ask, and Jeff Bickler's panel before this on workers' compensation, we're interested in the cases I'm working on, the chronic inflammation. Do you think there have been studies, or do you think there may be a correlation between the PFAS, the PFOA, and PFOS that's in the turnout gear and the, I would say, chronic exposure on the daily wearing of the gear and being in the bunkhouse? Is that what you're talking about with chronic inflammation, or how does that may relate, and are there any studies?
So none of the studies that we reviewed included any of the turnout gear. So inflammation can come from multi-sources. So it can be, from muscle damage, it can be from damage in the tissues in the lung or the, respiratory tract. So it's multiple sites where the damage can occur, and it can be released from the digestive system with exposure to extreme heat. So I think trying to pinpoint it to a single exposure point is perhaps problematic, because I think it's the repeated acute exposure without adequate time for acute inflammation is really valuable. But if we're not getting adequate recovery between exposures, then you're going to have this increasing levels of inflammation in the body that are then going to lead to that enduring tissue damage potentially.
I'm really asking, is there any study just saying that it is one possible chronic?
I didn't review any.
Do you think that there may be any at this upcoming end of the year other study on
Only if they've been published since, was it May
May of
last
last year.
no, actually June, anything
Was
that
it June?
came
Yeah,
up to
yeah,
June,
June. We could
so
say June,
nothing,
yeah.
nothing prior to that point.
Yeah, of course. Any last minute question? Okay, yes, Dr. Rivera.
What are some challenges that you guys have faced to validate or trying to demonstrate that the environmental factors by themselves could be potential epigenetic changes or potential inflammatory stimuli. Because in daily life, we also face diet, so eating pork chop 5 days in a week can cause inflammation because we're eating a lot of fats. So there are other factors that can also challenge validating the epigenetic inflammatory findings.
So in response to that, I think that's where it comes down to the study design. And so when we're looking at our firefighter cohorts, was there a control group to compare to, and were the differences that we saw in the firefighters significantly higher than the general population?
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. So yeah, so in these studies, you're trying to look for studies that exclude these other kinds of factors, diet, exercise, et cetera, so that you could, with confidence, conclude that it's the firefighting that's causing the chronic inflammation or whatever it is you're looking at. And Luana actually read every one of these papers, and you know, the conclusion was there's clear evidence for acute inflammation due to firefighting. I think that's really not up for discussion at this point. You could argue one way or the other for the chronic. Most of us view that what literature is there is suitable to conclude that chronic inflammation is happening. But more studies are really needed to, I think, convince others and to make a compelling argument that indeed firefighting per se, nothing else, not the diet or whatever else the people are engaged in, is causing chronic inflammation. But these studies are evaluated to try to exclude these ancillary or extra other kinds of exposures so that the conclusion you make is based solely on the firefighting itself.
All right, please join me in thanking both of our scientists for explaining on mechanistic studies of the IARC monograph.